right, this train is on schedule. Find a seat, hang out in back. We're gonna continue moving on here. Okay. So, everybody, how are we doing so far? I haven't checked in between. I've been going back and forth. Everybody feeling good about this stuff? Having a good time? All right. Moving along, we are here with David Guo, who is from Coursera. I'm sure everybody knows Coursera, prominent ed tech company. You are a software engineer at Coursera, and you're also, kind of like Ryan, a little bit responsible for infrastructure and security and managing both. Maybe tell us a little bit about your team makeup and what your kind of responsibilities are.
Yeah, I think the structure at Coursera is pretty interesting. We kind of structured all the teams to be super practical and not very specialized. So for instance, we don't actually have a security ops team, we don't have a DevOps team, things of that nature. But we are a team of 7 for infrastructure, serving about 100 engineers, about 15 data scientists, and we serve the company broadly as well. So just a few examples for the company, it's mainly table stakes. So making sure that we have compliance in orders because we do B2B business and we do degrees business. And for the engineers, it's productivity, build and dev, inter-service communication, stuff like that. And for data science, it's data warehousing and making sure they have the right tools to satisfy business intelligence needs or analyst needs.
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually, this is a perfect lead-in. We didn't really think about this back to back, but very similar company persona as Quid, and actually your team and your individual responsibility are very similar. So maybe we have a lot of the same goals as Ryan just talked about. So maybe tell us a little bit about how you kind of first stumbled on kind of BeyondCorp's architecture and model for how you deal with kind of access controls in the cloud.
Sure. I'd say we had like a really recent philosophical change about how we view what we should focus on at the company. More towards like this maybe Netflix style of thinking of we only focus on core competency. What should Coursera do that could make Coursera better? Like rather than maintaining a bunch of tools that we've created in-house, and one of them was like a very similar thing to ScaleFT. We built this like T-SOCs thing with a Bastion and managed all the SSH keys with Puppet, and that's, I guess, like good for 15, 20 engineers. Yeah, maybe.
I mean, yeah, it's a good start.
Yeah. And so we're going down a list. So we had this philosophical change about not spending our time doing this, not spending our time making these products better, and rather than have them in maintenance, just replace them with better tools. We went down the list. This was like one of the immediate things, like, oh, we cannot support this anymore. It's like a lot of DevOps work, and it's also just, it is kind of a security hazard. Has like a few holes that we talked about before.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's exactly how we stumbled upon ScaleFT. We went through the solutions. We didn't want to do a VPN solution because we had already built a Bastion-like solution, so we didn't want to just all of a sudden switch gears and support a VPN.
Well, it's good that you kind of came to that realization early on. It's really easy to get kind of sucked into building your own tooling, building your own kind of infrastructure. One of the after effects of that is maintaining that software over time, and you might have some of your best engineers working on, stuck on managing tooling when, core competencies as a business is important, and focusing on that. So we talked a little bit about cloud. Coursera, you have a very highly scalable, elastic kind of cloud environment. You built in a lot of automation. Yeah. Maybe tell us about what happens when you introduce more kind of automation and more tooling into these kind of really highly scalable systems. Are there any side effects or things to watch out for?
Yeah, I think any reasonable developer will get paranoid of whether or not their automation is actually doing the right thing or working or even running. And we're, at least for us, we're very thoughtful about this. And so we got to a point where we were maybe too overdoing it. Like we would have our Slack channels getting spammed by all of these automation like feedback things like, oh, this job is failing or this workflow is failing or, that hasn't been fixed yet. So that's just like one issue that we ran into with too much automation. And if you want to be very observant about your automation tools, then yeah, it gets crazy to have clarity.
Slack ops, that's the term. Yeah, Mark was talking a little earlier about kind of injecting security into the automation properly. Where do you see the right places to kind of start thinking about these DevOps environments and where security should fit?
Yeah, for us, we're a little bit more unique because the 100 engineers I was talking about earlier, very few of them actually work on AWS, other than like that one team that kind of works on grading. So the rest of our team is primarily application developers. And so we do want to be very high leverage for them, and we want to take care of a lot of the security stuff for them. So I would say like, we want to make every single step of the way as secure as possible. So from AWS, that's like our lowest building block. And then the tools, abstractions that we provide them, we want to make sure that you can't do anything crazy with them or too unsensible.
Right, that's the least privilege, is making sure people don't do anything too crazy. Yeah. Great, and your vertical has probably some very interesting compliance requirements, and being kind of a pioneer on the technology side of a traditional kind of vertical. Yeah. How do you balance like the compliance that you have to check off versus like real security and kind of operations?
Yeah, it's a struggle, and at first it's gotten a lot better. But at first, when we entered the B2B business, you get a lot of these, like not contracts, but like terms that you have to abide by in order to do business with other companies. And a lot of these, I guess, education companies tend to think that everyone's still using data centers and everyone's still doing colo, and so it took a while to get them used to how the cloud works and like what our responsibilities are. And primarily now, like our thinking is we should be focusing on data security. So data at rest and data in transit, that's like the minimum bar. Mm-hmm. And then now with GDPR, there's additional restrictions. So PII and even restricting your own employee access is something we're currently doing.
GDPR, everybody's having a good time with that one, right? Yeah. And I know one thing that I've talked to you about in the past is kind of the auditing of these environments. What are the things that you look out for on a day-to-day basis, and how do you kind of use that information to kind of adjust accordingly?
Yeah, we're still very not good at this process, so we still do manual audits for as much of the things as possible. That being said, because like very few people have access to the AWS toggles and switches, we're less paranoid about that. We know that like only 8 or 9 individuals will actually use AWS, so we can keep that environment relatively clean. For the actual server stuff, so once our developers start deploying and getting their devs onto these instances, we use third-party solutions. Threat Stack is what we use. Okay. It just keeps an audit log of like a lot of the network input, output, and even just Linux file commands. Right. And that's been useful. And you can tune it to be queryable on like dangerous things such as like TCP dump and SCP, simple things like that.
Got it, makes sense.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, key theme of today has been a lot of developer productivity, and that's something that's important to you. Now, when you kind of start to introduce these, new tooling and security into the processes, how are developers responding to that? Or are they, understanding it? Is it like they don't notice like at Quid, or are you finding a little bit of, pushback or anything?
No, it's been good, primarily because we have other things that seem to be in the developer's way. So we have much slower processes. So we use, I don't know if anyone uses Scala here, but we are a Scala shop, and we are perhaps one of the biggest Scala shops that at least we could find on GitHub. Yeah. And so being like one of the biggest projects for a language that doesn't have a big community is kind of like slowing us down. So I would say like our developers are currently more, more concerned about that side of things than what we're doing to slow them down.
Sure. I mean, everything becomes a prioritization, and what are the problems that you're facing. Great. So it sounds like you got things working well at Coursera. Now, for people here who are kind of looking at this or looking at BeyondCorp as kind of an architecture model, are there use cases that you would recommend or kind of tips if you wanted to recommend someone to get started on a similar kind of path?
Yeah. Well, I think you should start with it. I think you should start with the Bastion approach for sure. we never looked back, and when we did the entire exercise with what we would look like with a VPN, what kind of guardrails we would have to be, it was insane. And just like thinking about the maintenance was pretty bad. And I guess if you do end up rolling your own solution, don't use SSH keys. It's like really cumbersome to maintain, and also not as secure as short-lived SSH certificates.
Right. Yeah, that's a big principle. We talked a little earlier on having this architecture that's kind of performing real-time access controls. But if you're backing that with static credentials, you're kind of wasting this effort of building the architecture. So you need the kind of credential mechanism to match. And so that's something that's important to us at ScaleFT is these really like short-lived credentials that you can kind of attest to a user on that device there, and then the resource they're trying to access at like a really specific point in time. And that kind of rounds out the whole system. So, when we recommend people to kind of move in this direction, we kind of usually start with that use case, and it just so happens that worked well for you. For sure. You tried a bunch of different kind of tooling around this, and I think like Netflix Bless was one that you tried. Tell us a little bit about the kind of process, the things that you were like looking out for, and not necessarily like on a ScaleFT perspective, but like from what are we trying to accomplish and what are we evaluating against?
Yeah, we really value simplicity. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if everyone here has used ScaleFT, but the client is really great. The CLI is equally just as great, and that's definitely something we didn't see in any of the other solutions. So Bless. It's essentially roll your own. Like you kind of use their like AWS like policies, but then at the end of the day, you still need a client to be able to interact with those things. We looked into teleport by gravitational teleport, one of the two things, and pretty good, but like more moving pieces, and the client was less simple to use. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, makes sense. Does device posture factor into anything into your environment? Or you haven't quite gotten there yet?
Not yet. Yeah, we're doing like the minimum required for compliance. So we do have antivirus. We do have that barcode that someone was talking about earlier on every laptop. But we haven't managed to, create some sort of feedback loop with ScaleFT and what the laptop is currently doing right now.
Yeah, like we talked earlier, that's a big part of the architecture that still has a lot of evolution. And unless you're Google and you have fully managed inventory devices that everything about, it can be challenging in this kind of world. Mm-hmm. But we're seeing projects come out like Facebook's OS query is a really good example of something that could really be useful in extracting device information and making kind of decisions based on that. So yeah, hopefully there's some evolution on that. Let's see. Anything else from like a beyond core perspective, where maybe from like a people perspective, where you see as this enables my team to kind of be more productive, or maybe not necessarily your team, but like the data scientists and developers that are kind of working in the environments?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I think the most immediate impact that it can have is you're not overwhelmed with the amount of resources that you have access to. Mm-hmm. So we do have like 500-600 odds hosts, and so it's really difficult to give any developer a sane view of all of these hosts without knowing which one is used for what. And so, especially for data scientists where they have a much limited subset. And so we use projects in ScaleFT, so it's when we break it down by that, it's much sensible to have a good picture of what each host does and what you have access to.
Right. Yeah, I mean the role-based access controls have a lot to do with the personas, and the more that you can kind of break things down and get more fine-grained, the better off you can be. And when you look at Google's own implementation, they have their policies based on kind of these trust tiers, and you must be this tall to ride, and everybody's kind of looking at these kind of things differently from like a policy perspective. But at the end of the day, it's just trying to make sure that the right people have the right access to different things. And I know, obviously data security is something that is important to you and every company that exists in the world. So it's good to hear that you believe in the architecture and you believe in the model, and you're building systems around it, or you're using systems around it, so you don't have to build it all yourself and and things like that. So again, another great case study of a company. How long has Coursera been around? Probably a decade.
2012.
Yeah. So I mean, fairly newish company, kind of born in the cloud. Is able to kind of achieve these kind of beyond corp style architectures without having to go through the 7-year transformation that Google did. So it's really good to have you here explain that and share your own experiences. I think we got a couple minutes for questions, if anybody's got any questions for David. Yes, sir. Hey.
Just on the context of SSH keys, moving away from SSH keys and using ScaleFT for a manual interaction when there requires a user input, we can use the ScaleFT's command line interface. But did you guys ever face issues with credentials, static credentials embedded in the code, vault, or an appliance? How did you guys migrate, and how was ScaleFT used? I mean, it's for both of you guys because it's
Sure.
product specific.
Yeah. So are you familiar with all the AWS ecosystem?
This is not specific to AWS.
Yeah,
it's,
I see. Yeah.
it's related.
So yeah, for us, I guess it was a lot simpler. We didn't have a lot of dangling credentials around. Primarily used what AWS gave us, so we trusted security groups. So network access would just be, one directional, like you open up a port for one other service to look at. So we didn't use credentials for that. And for actual access, like grabbing files and stuff, we primarily used IAM roles in AWS. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but we didn't really encounter this issue on our end. Yeah.
I think one of our philosophies from kind of a company perspective is that an SSH key represents a static credential, and if you're making real-time dynamic decisions, you can't have a static credential. Now, having a credential mechanism to match that decision that you've made is something that we've had to build a lot of tooling around. And Robert actually is going to be talking a lot about the kind of architectural and technical decisions, our kind of beliefs around that. But at the end of the day, if you have this architecture that's making kind of these decisions, you can't have something that's static back, because an SSH key doesn't represent a real-time attestation of trust. It just represents a cryptographically verifiable key, but that key is something that could be shared, lost, or stolen and used elsewhere. So traditional mechanisms might be use a vaulting service, but that doesn't necessarily remove the notion of it being a static credential. So it's like philosophically, like something we really believe in at ScaleFT, and it's very core to the Beyond Corp architecture, and something that Google obviously implemented as well as part of their environment. And it's kind of that last mile of, we built this system, it's capable of making policy decisions based on all these user and device and attributes and things like that. Here's a cryptographically verifiable attestation of that trust at that point in time. But it requires some product development, something we've been working on for quite some time now. Yeah. So, but does that, I guess, help answer that question a little bit? Cool.
Thank you.
Any other questions for David while we're here? I'll ask a question to the audience. Who's kind of looking at like Beyond Corp as a model that they want to start going down the path? Like, has this been really helpful in hearing like actual companies explain where they started and get along the way? Good. Well, that's why we're here. We try to help people out. I feel like it's going to take a community effort, and I think the more we hear from David and Ryan and people who have, believe in the architecture, but have actually gone through the process of doing a real-world implementation. And like, it's not just about the outcomes; it's about having the belief and being able to actually do it as a practitioner is really exciting, and I'm really glad to have you here and share your thoughts. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
All right, we'll take another 5-minute break. Thanks, David. Awesome.